Welcome to The People Make the Places, Episode 9, May 2025. This is Mike's clone voice, narrating most of this episode. The clone was created from recordings from 2005 through 2020. It is quite accurate, but the intonation is sometimes off. Mike's current speech is slightly impacted from radiation treatment in 2016 for tonsil cancer. You will hear that voice in the recent interview with Robert Kurson. The source and quality of the recordings vary. Totally blind from age 3 to 46, I had no expectation of ever having any vision. When I reflect on my new vision story, which began in 1999, I had no idea of the people I would meet and stay in touch with over the years. This is a story of how I met and stayed in touch with those people. There were three media flurries. One was when I regained some low vision March 6, 2000, and all the media that spawned, in particular Dateline NBC and a BBC documentary. Then in 2003, a Nature Neuroscience article from Dr. Fine was published. And another wave of media hit, which was even more than the first wave. I was on all national media networks, international programs, and local media. I had to engage some of my staff to help manage the media inquiries. The third wave of media came when Crashing Through by Robert Kurson was published in May 2007. Backed by Random House and promoted heavily by Barnes & Noble, it became a bestseller and was in the top 50 books on Amazon for that year. This notoriety thrust me into the limelight again on the networks, Drive Time Radio, NPR, People Magazine, Snap Judgment, Here and Now, and many more. I was even invited to be on Oprah's show about miracle stories, which I declined because mine was not a miracle story. Those media requests tapered off, but continued for many years. I still get emails from readers of Crashing Through and requests to speak. I will play audio and make comments in this episode about the people who I met because of the new vision adventure, many of whom are still close friends. Those people have enriched my life even more than the low vision I acquired. I had no idea either about all the vision science, which I learned about from Ione, her colleagues, and the many conferences I attended with her. The opportunity for potential vision started with Dr. Dan Goodman in 1999, who did my stem cell and cornea surgeries in 2000. Ione Fine saw the media reports shortly thereafter and sought me out, hence began our lifelong friendship. The BBC sent a crew of 4 people to make a documentary on my story, including Annabelle Hobley and Ali Scott, who followed me around for 4 months. They created an award-winning documentary in 2001. Just when I was sick of the media in 2005, Robert Kurson contacted me about writing an article and possibly a book, which I was reluctant to do. When that book came out in 2007, Sarah Beck wrote a Crashing Through song about me. We signed movie contracts with 20th Century Fox. The first screenwriter of many to come was Oscar winner Bruce Rubin. Here are some of the people who define my new vision adventure, beginning with the vision scientists in the BBC documentary narrated by Juliet Stevenson.
This is the story of Mike May, who was blinded when he was 3 years old. 42 years later, he was offered eye surgery that could restore his sight. But the risks are great. It's one of the biggest decisions Mike will ever have to make.
Dan Goodman.
With the initial evaluation of Mike's eyes, I could see that his right eye had some vision. When he was first seen, he really could only tell if the light in a room was on or if it was off. He had what we would consider light perception vision. If a hand was moving in front of his face, he really couldn't tell if the hand was moving up and down or sideways. It became clear that he had at least some chance, an unknown chance really, of retrieving some useful vision in that eye.
Successful sight restoration in adults who have been blind since infancy is extremely rare. There are only 20 recorded cases worldwide in the last 200 years. Now, Dr. Goodman was able to offer Mike a completely new procedure. Mike spent nearly a year deliberating whether to go ahead with the surgery. He was acutely aware of the turbulent experiences of previous patients.
Oliver Sacks.
I think that if a sense is suddenly added, the whole economy of life can be altered, because people have previously depended on other senses. All their habits, all their patterns of living are based on touch and hearing. So very difficult to have an additional sense. It seems like a gift, but it is a dangerous gift, and it may disturb one very deeply. There are cases in the literature of people sort of pulling out their eyes, or just closing their eyes and not wanting to use it.
Dr. Ione Fine.
There's a famous philosophical debate which was started by a philosopher, Molyneux. Suppose you had a man who was blind since birth, so he'd only ever felt spheres and cubes, and then his sight was restored to him. Would he be able to tell a sphere from a cube just by looking at it? And this gets at the fundamental question of how is our perception of the world shaped by our visual experience? And Mike, of course, is the answer to that question.
Brian Bashan.
I think the story is very little about blindness and more about the amazing adaptability of the human character. Mike embraced change and became an extremely good blind guy, particularly learning the self-confidence and attitude that comes with being a fully actualized blind person. And in some ways, it's a wonderful symbolic way to look at this new vision. It's only the latest example of a life that embraces change. Should he become blind later on in life, he'll embrace that as well. Sight is not the be-all and end-all. Sight is a lovely thing, a sensual thing, but something that can be explored and then, as Mike may have to do later, let go of again.
It was very distressing with my newly acquired low vision. The media attempts to explain my complicated journey, as you can hear in these clips, including Stone Phillips from NBC, Diane Sawyer from Good Morning America, Charles Osgood and John Blackstone from CBS Sunday Morning, and my favorite, Steve Inskeep from NPR. I stayed in touch with some of these media folks like Christian Martin and Josh Mankiewicz from Dateline, the late Frank DeFord, and Annabelle Hobley from the BBC, who I see whenever I travel to London. She sounds much like Juliet Stevenson, the BBC narrator. It is such a gift to be in touch and to know about each other's lives and families after 24 years. The other BBC producer, Ali Scott, who now lives in Australia, took me on a 3-day trip to Hawaii to film me snorkeling for the conclusion of the BBC piece. Coincidentally, the underwater cameraman was also named Mike May.
We have a story so amazing, we have to bring it to you right now.
It is the moment of truth for Mike May and his eye surgeon.
A Davis man who has been blind most of his life may soon be able to see again.
From London, here again is Stone Phillips.
Most of us take our eyesight for granted. You may feel a little differently after you see this next story. It's about a man blind since the age of 3 who was given the chance to see again. But there's a hitch. The operation is risky. It could restore his sight or rob him of the little vision he still has. Is it a gamble worth taking, and will it pay off?
Good Morning America.
As we said, you're going to meet a man now who had his sight restored in a way that has only happened maybe 20 times anywhere in the world, as far as we know, in documented ways. His story is now the subject of a new book by Robert Kurson called Crashing Through, which follows Mike May's surprisingly difficult journey from blindness. Then one day, a doctor said there was revolutionary new surgery, which transplanted corneal stem cells into the eye, and with a corneal transplant, would let the light shine through. It is great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And thank you for the compliment on my green
Oh, I love it. That's beautiful.
jacket.
Charles Osgood.
To see again after years and years of blindness is an amazing blessing. But it turns out it's also a very big challenge. John Blackstone this morning has the story of a man who fully appreciates that blessing and is more than up to the challenge.
Mike May's remarkable story of blindness and sight is the story of a man who could never resist adventure. Mike's vision is so limited he's still considered legally blind, but skiing is a joy again.
NPR Morning Edition.
After most of a lifetime of blindness, Michael May is learning to see. He was 3.5 years old when a chemical explosion took away his eyesight. 46 years later, surgery restored some vision in his right eye. He is one of the few people in recorded history to have their sight restored after a long period of blindness, and his case is recorded this week in the journal Nature Neuroscience. Michael May joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you describe the science a little bit here? What was wrong with you and how was it fixed?
Well, the medical problem was that the surface of my eye was burned, but the inside was not. So what they were able to do once stem cell technology evolved to the point it has been in the last couple of years is replace the surface of the eye with fresh tissue, let that grow in, and then once that was healthy, they could then put in a cornea transplant, which of course they've done for many years.
And when you first were able to see out of this eye, you weren't necessarily able to process what you saw.
The processing has been the issue all along. Once they got the optics working, then it's a matter of what does the brain remember and how much can it grow. I'm just learning the world one item at a time. I'm building my library of visual information, of visual clues, and there's no reason that that process can't continue. But I'll just get faster at understanding things. I won't necessarily get any better at discerning details.
I had no idea when I reluctantly agreed 20 years ago for Robert Kurson to fly from Chicago to Davis, California, to interview me for an article in Possible Book, what a huge impact he would have on my life. I was convinced when he published the article for Esquire magazine, which won a National Media Award, followed by a 7-figure offer for a movie deal from 20th Century Fox. What really sold me on the book project was Robert's amazing attention to detail and to the true story, which I observed also when reading his bestseller, Shadow Divers. As it happened, Crashing Through was released on Stevie Wonder's 57th birthday, and I was with him, Jamie Foxx, and my friend Rob Reese. Robert Kurson comments on meeting Stevie Wonder with me.
Well, that was another one of the most thrilling days for me. And this was, early on in our own working together, where I was interviewing you, and we flew in to Los Angeles and we had an appointment to meet Stevie, and we went to his studio. He's larger than life, and he walked in, and I remember he said to us, "Do you guys like waffles?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you like chicken?" I said, "Of course." He says, "Well, let's go for some waffles and chicken later." I don't think we ended up doing that, but it was an amazing start to an incredible day. We drove around, we talked about all kinds of things. I remember we talked about Richard Pryor that day, and it was just you, me, Stevie, and his bodyguard. The thing that really stands out to me that day, and I remember him singing in the SUV we were driving in, just the four of us, and he was singing. It was amazing, Mike. I couldn't believe it. The thing that really stands out to me is that he pulled me aside and he said, "I want to buy something nice for Mike today. I really love Mike. Help me pick something out." And we went to an electronics store, a big one, not Best Buy, but something like that. And it was pandemonium when we walked in. There's Stevie Wonder. But all he cared about was having me find something that you would appreciate and that would mean something to you, because you had already meant a lot to him. And he talked to me a lot about why you meant so much to him and why he thought he meant so much to you. So that was an incredible day. And there's another friendship that's gone on and on and on, hasn't it?
Yeah, do you remember what he bought me?
I think it was a portable satellite radio, like Sirius and XM.
I had that. I still have it.
But yeah, that's what we ended up picking out, and he was so happy to do it.
Crashing Through was wildly successful. We went on a book tour and told some of the backstory. Here's a portion of the 26-minute interview at the end of the Crashing Through audio version.
Hello, this is Robert Kurson, author of Crashing Through. I'm here in the studio with Mike May and have the rare opportunity to get to ask him some questions I didn't get to ask the first time around, and to ask about things that I've really been wanting to ask since we finished working on the book. Mike, welcome.
Thanks. I didn't think there was a single question you hadn't asked.
I know. Mike, let me start by asking you, when I met you, I was very much a novice about blindness and blindness issues. And I remember one of the first times we met, one of the first questions, if it wasn't even the first question I ever asked you, was to tell me if things looked different to you once you gained vision than you expected them to look when you were blind. And you very politely and gently reminded me that a blind person doesn't really have an expectation of how something should look. I wonder if it was frustrating for you to deal with someone so new to the subject of blindness and the thinking about vision as it was, at least in the early stages with me.
Well, you may have been a rookie when it comes to blindness, but you weren't a rookie in terms of trying to understand people and posing questions and being so inquisitive. It was just your curiosity exploring my curiosity. So it really worked well. It's probably harder to explain to somebody who's got a preconceived notion about blindness some of these subtleties. And because you really hadn't met any other blind people or had any preconceived notions, you came into this with a clean slate, and it was really an incredible experience over a couple of years to educate you in terms of my perspective on blindness, which, of course, I hasten to point out is my perspective and doesn't represent everybody's perspective.
Yeah, and there came a point one day, I remember we were sitting in your family room once and talking about what it means for you to see in depth. And neither of us could really connect in terms of language with each other. I was certain that you didn't see in depth in the way I understood depth, and you felt certain you did see in depth. And I think that we had come to this philosophical point where language was no longer sufficient for our discussion. And I think started to get frustrated with each other a little bit. We could no longer speak the same language in a certain way. What do you think about that issue of language? And do you remember struggling with those kinds of points in our discussion sometimes?
I do remember that particular circumstance. It was frustrating because I was coming from a world, a non-visual world, where there wasn't any kind of language that could articulate where I was coming from. And you, of course, being sighted all your life, couldn't understand not ever having that dimension. It really is like another dimension, and trying to talk about a sixth dimension or a seventh dimension is so theoretical that language really defies our ability to try to explain it.
During our interview process, did you find anything uncomfortable to discuss?
I don't think there was anything that was really uncomfortable. In any discussion, you can have different interpretations of how something is said, and different people have different impressions of the information. So I think particularly early on, I wondered, well, how is this going to turn out when I tell Robert, and then Robert translates that into his words? How close to my understanding and my thoughts of this will it really end up being once it's penned?
And how did you feel about that once you got a look at the book?
It was a pretty amazing experience to be reading a book about oneself, and you've, of course, read it to me in its final draft form, and to actually hear that was both exciting, nerve-wracking. I was on edge. I was on a flight to Sydney, and I, of course, didn't sleep the whole flight. I was listening to the book nonstop.
In 4th grade, he discovered traffic safety equipment in the playground supply closet. He signed up for the safety patrol class and showed up for training with the rest of the hopefuls. It was a half hour before the instructor realized what was going on and pulled him aside and told him that a person had to be able to see in order to help children cross the street. The same news was delivered to Medina, Mike's resource teacher. Medina asked Mike what he thought they should do. Mike told him that he knew he could be a good crossing guard, and he told him he couldn't stand the idea of not getting a chance. Medina told him to go to the principal to make his case, and that he would back him the whole way. The principal scarcely understood what Mike was asking. He wanted to do what? Mike outlined his plan. He would listen for cars the way he did when he crossed the street himself. "You're blind," the principal said. "I can do it," Mike said. "You have to be looking for cars, not just listening," the principal said. "It won't work, sorry." Medina stepped forward. He argued that there were teachers already present during crossing time, and he talked about Mike. "I know this kid," Medina said. "He can do it." The principal said he would take the case under advisement. The school called Ori Jean and informed her about Mike's crazy idea. She told them it didn't sound crazy to her. A few days and many meetings later, the principal gave Mike a vest with a triangle shape on the front. The next Monday, he was holding up a stop sign and escorting children across the street.
Here is Robert interviewing O.J. in 2005 about the cornea transplants I had as a child.
So on these transplants that Mike had, you were very hopeful for them, and then you could see that they weren't taking and it wasn't working out right, and that was a letdown to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really, really hard to build up all this hope and expectations. The expectation is, yes, it's going to work this time.
Right.
Well, it didn't. So finally, when the doctor said, there's nothing more we can do, let's just not wait until we get some other kinds of influence that could help us.
And was that terribly disappointing to you to hear that?
No. I was actually glad because I wouldn't have to go through that thing of hoping and being disappointed another time.
Right. And how old was Mike during these efforts?
He was 3 when it happened, and it probably went on till going into high school, probably about 12.
And do you remember Mike being disappointed when they didn't work out?
No, I don't think he was. He seems to have this ability to move forward, no matter how many setbacks he had.
And that must have been heartening for you as a parent, that at least it wasn't crushing him when they didn't work out.
Yes. He had a lot more stamina than I did in terms of that.
Robert speaking at OJ's memorial in 2007.
I thought I'd heard a remarkable life when I talked to Mike, but in certain ways it was nothing compared to hearing about OJ's life. I'm inundated with emails and letters, almost all of which say, that Mike May is an incredible person. And then it's always this ... followed by, but oh, that mother of his.
I have the privilege of seeing Robert and his family yearly, from attending baseball games together to attending the bar mitzvah of his sons. He reflects here on how we first met.
I had just published my first book, Shadow Divers, and was looking for a great new idea. And it came to me that I might like to figure out what the single and most rare and greatest human experience is. And if I could find a person who had had that, perhaps I could talk to that person and even write a book about it. And I started to contemplate different ideas. And one of the first that came to me, Mike, was when my dad said that he liked to go to the Ravinia Music Festival. It's an outdoor music festival very near my home in the suburbs outside Chicago. And he would often go see classical music there. And he said that when he went to see the Beaux-Arts Trio play Mozart in 68-degree weather with a gentle wind blowing, to him that was the pinnacle human experience. And, I'd been there with him for that and for other concerts. And indeed, that was one of the immense and wonderful experience. And then I thought, well, maybe instead it's something with food, because I had a dinner cooked for me in a private home by Thomas Keller, the owner and chef of the French Laundry in Napa, which at the time and might still be considered one of the great restaurants in the world. And that was an amazing experience. And then I thought, what if I had got to go on a date with the most beautiful movie starlet in the world? Would that be the pinnacle human experience? And those all seemed wonderful. But then I thought, and this was like an epiphany, I might have literally sat up in my bed, Mike, and thought, no, the single rarest and greatest experience possible for a human being has to be when a person has been blind for life and then is made to see. Imagine what that must be like, that your whole life you have no idea what the visual world is like. And then one day, likely through the miracles of science and technology, given the opportunity to open your eyes and then you can see the Golden Gate Bridge, an elephant, the moon, and then your family. And so I thought that has to be it. So what I'm going to do in the morning when I wake up is I'm going to call the University of Chicago and I'm going to call Northwestern University and I'm going to have them give me a list of the people that's happened to. And there has to be, several over the years. And I'm going to call them and ask them to describe this most wonderful experience. Well, turns out after a couple days of looking in their archives and everything, they came back to me and said, not only do we not have any cases in our files of this happening. We can't find any in the records out there anywhere. We don't know that this has ever happened. And that sounded really strange to me. How could this have never happened? Now they offered me, they said, well, we have lots of people who've had, normal vision and then lost their vision due to cataracts or other reasons and then had their vision restored. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted someone who was going to see for the first time as an adult. So I started to do my own research. And that's when I discovered that in the entire history of recorded civilization, there were 15 cases where a person had been blind for life and then were made to see as an adult. And the most recent that I could find, at least in my initial research, had happened in the 1950s. And that seemed incredibly strange. But even more unusual is that when I started to dig into some of these cases, it was not that this was the single greatest experience that could have ever happened for these people. It seemed to be, in case after case, the single worst experience. In case after case, you read about suicidal ideation after new vision. You read about fury at the surgeons and doctors who had helped to give the new vision. You read about people reverting to living in a dark room, trying to shut off the new vision by blindfold or staying in a dark room or anything else they could do. And in every case, one after another, the results seemed to be disastrous for the person who had finally gained vision. And then I came across one more case, and I believe it was the 16th case, and that was of a man currently living in Davis, California. A man who seemed to be living not just a normal life, but this bursting, full life, a businessman, a traveler, a world traveler, whose name was Mike May. You may be familiar with that man. And that's how I came upon the story. And that's, I couldn't believe it. I was, stunned at the whole development. But here's a person that I could actually, if I could find his contact information, I might be able to call or even go out and visit and ask, what was this like? And why was it so terrible for your predecessor? So that's how it started. I'm very, very choosy when selecting stories to write about for a book. I've still only published 4 books, going on 25 years now. And so I'm very, very selective. And part of what I love about a great story is that it's not intuitive. So many interesting things happened on that first visit where I met you. I remember asking you because I knew there was an issue with seeing faces and recognizing faces with your predecessors. And I remember asking you, can you see my face? And you said, oh yeah, I can see your face. It's right there. It's just that your face makes no sense to me. And that really was so interesting to me. And so I thought, if I could just sit with this person one more day or one more week or one more month, imagine what I could learn, and what I could learn not just about this issue and about vision, but about life. What makes a life full and rich and really worth living? Because it sure looked like that's what was happening with you in your house and with your beautiful family there.
And when you look back, Robert, on the experience as a whole, right? Researching, writing the book, coming out with the book, when you reflect on that, is there anything that went significantly different than you expected?
Well, at the time, for example, Mike, I didn't have any idea about the science of what was going on in your brain or the brains of your predecessors. And so I had to learn an explanation for why some things were very, very difficult for people who had only learned to see later in life, and why certain other things worked seemingly perfectly. So that was really interesting. I had to learn the science. The other thing that was, to me, probably the most important element of the entire story was learning about your upbringing and about how your mom raised you. Because I'm always, in the end, after stories about life and what makes a good life and what people do when they come to crossroads. And the more I learned about how you grew up and about how your mom raised you. What seemed to me immense courage she showed and immense confidence in you. She demanded that you explore, that you speak to every one of your curiosities, and truly that you crash through. And that was incredibly important for me because at the time that I was meeting you, I had a son who was 3 years old and another one who was on the way, maybe a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks away from being born. And so it was really important for me in my life at that moment to have an understanding about what makes a child speak to his or her curiosity and what effect the confidence in the parent has about backing off and letting the child fall, for example, or stumble, or even get hurt in the name of the idea of full exploration. And that was incredibly important to me. And that's something I never saw coming on my first trip out to see you.
Yeah, and I mean, there was so much that came after the book, the whole book tour and various experiences we had in the media. And I think one of the most unique ones was the interaction and time with Richard Gregory in London.
That was an amazing trip. He had actually pioneered a lot of the vision science that explained what was going on in the brain of someone who was only seeing for the first time after the brain had sort of hardwired itself and was no longer as plastic as it was during childhood. But he also was the lead researcher and investigator on the most recent case before yours, which was of a man named Sidney Bradford, referred to in the literature as SB in England. And Richard Gregory was a legend, and he took us to speak to world-class scientists and researchers who crowded into this lecture room because you were such a rare specimen, Mike. The chance to actually speak to a person and to have them answer questions was singular to them. And as far as they knew, may never happen again. And so watching them watch you and ask you questions was really, really thrilling. Richard Gregory also told us stories about his previous case with Sidney Bradford in the 1950s. And the general way I remember those stories is that for a few days, Sidney Bradford was thrilled with his new vision. Then soon things turned around, and they turned around very quickly. You know, he struggled with all the same things that all the cases do. He had trouble processing certain visual information. But there was one thing that always stood out to me, Mike, in the story Richard Gregory told us about SB, and that was that he wanted to see animals in the zoo. And so he took a bus to the London Zoo to meet Richard Gregory and some other researchers. And along the way, he was looking at things outside the bus. And when he got to the zoo, he seemed completely devastated. And he was no longer excited to see the animals or to discover this new world in front of him. And when Richard Gregory asked him what was wrong, Sidney Bradford told him that for his whole life growing up without vision, he imagined the visual world to be perfect, to be a kind of paradise in a way. But on his way to the zoo, he had seen chipped paint on a light post and perhaps a torn bus seat. And it was devastating to him and disappointing. And that combined with the incessant and never-ending visual challenges, you know, he had to think and think hard just to make his way through the most basic things. It was all too much for him. And in the end, he died early, and people estimated that he died of disappointment. I'd never heard that before, died of disappointment. And so that's what a lot of what I remember discussing in England and with Richard Gregory and with the other researchers, and them asking you all kinds of questions because they knew the literature also. And they were not just asking the only person in the world they could ask these questions to. They were asking someone who clearly was not dying of disappointment. And so it was just an amazing thing to behold.
Richard Gregory about SB.
And then he put his hands on it, touched it, and I'll never forget this. He stood back and said, "Now I've touched it, I can see." But secondly, his wife he did not find her in the least bit attractive or beautiful visually. And Marcus, she wasn't amazingly attractive or beautiful, I have to say. But anyway, he really didn't like her face at all, which is sad. And the word see can refer both to vision and to understanding. And I think actually there's a deep truth behind this, that seeing something is in a way understanding it. Understanding and seeing are highly related, neurologically, if you like.
And what about going to the Athenaeum?
Yes. Yeah. And he told me about sitting down with Bertrand Russell there and having philosophical discussions. I also remember that, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but I wasn't dressed properly. And so they had to fit me for a jacket and a tie, both of which were about 3 sizes too small on me.
Yeah, it smelled like books and brandy, and
Yes.
Churchill and Eisenhower had met there.
And I think there was even a big stone out front of the entrance where very famous people hundreds of years ago used to hitch their horses. It was just all so charming.
It didn't really occur to me when we first met, and you're learning a million details about my life, that here we'd be 18 years later, and your newborn is now 18 years old, and we've had this rich life experience. And I had no idea at the time that we'd be having this conversation today.
No, I didn't either, Mike. And it is really the loveliest part of my career, and also an unexpected part. I used to be a lawyer, and that did not fit me correctly. And so I made this transition into writing with the hope and the dream of being able to tell wonderful stories like this. But I never imagined that a lifelong friendship would emerge from it. And it's not just I who love you and have stayed friends with you. My whole family loves you and considers you to be family. And that's an unexpected and most wonderful bonus from the career I chose. If I have been able to take even a little bit of inspiration from you and from your mom, OJ, and how she looked at the world and how you look at the world, and been able to infuse that in my kids, that's just another branch of the friendship that I'll never be able to thank you enough for. So this was much, much more than a book for me in the end. And I love the book, and I'm sure it will endure, but I'm certain also that our friendship will endure as well.
And here is the story of another person who became important in my life, Sarah Beck, because of Crashing Through, the book that keeps on giving.
Since regaining vision in 2000 and sharing his story in the book Crashing Through, Mike May has experienced firsthand the way that inspiration can inspire. When Mike May serendipitously met singer-songwriter Sarah Beck at a tiny Nashville bar, the power of his story dovetailed with his lifelong love of music and resulted in the following chain of events that inspired Beck, as well as countless Nashville musicians, singers, and songwriters. Mike May describes the chance meeting in April 2007.
I was attending a conference in Nashville and went alone to a famous entertainment venue, the Bluebird Cafe. In typical fashion, there were 4 local artists performing, 2 famous songwriters and 2 new singer-songwriters, everyone singing and playing their own tunes. To take full advantage of my new vision, I sat at a small table crammed against the stage where I was 6 feet from one of the new performers, Sarah Beck. I really liked what I could see and hear. When she began singing, I fell in love. Her music was passionate and the words meaningful and cleverly crafted. Her voice was amazing, and I knew right then and there Sarah Beck was someone special. Immersed in the sound of her music, I was also enjoying my newly acquired vision. I could see the stage lights reflecting off her guitar, and I could see how she flipped back her blonde hair. I could hear the smile in her voice, but hard as I stared, I couldn't actually see it. After the performance, Sarah stepped off the stage next to my table. She introduced herself and said, "You are going to have to explain something to me. I see you have a seeing eye, dog, but I could swear you were looking into my eyes when I was singing. How is that?" I said it is a long story, but the short version is that I can see a little after being blind most of my life, and I am still learning to see. There is a book about me coming out in a month. I will send you a copy if I can trade you for your CD, which she handed me, and off I went to my conference. I sent Sarah the Crashing Through book when it came out in May 2007, and we traded a few emails. On July 1st, I was with my wife at the No Barriers conference in Squaw Valley. We were sitting in our room and she was helping me to visually distinguish the jagged mountain peaks just out our window. My computer announced a new email with an attachment named Crashing Through. I assumed it was from Robert Kurson about our book tour. When I clicked on it, it turned out to be an MP3 file, and Sarah Beck's voice flowed out of the speakers and all around me. I sat there with my wife, looking at this beautiful view, sobbing as the story of my life and my passions was told in 3 short minutes by Sarah Beck with a Crashing Through song. I never quite cared for the title of the book, but once I heard the song Crashing Through took on real meaning. Fast forward 6 weeks later, my mother, OJ, died. She was a real hero of my life and of Crashing Through. I emailed Sarah and invited her and her husband to the memorial in October. They agreed to come to the outdoor ceremony in the Napa Redwoods. Sarah, her husband Park, and 2 musician friends were performing the first song for the ceremony when none other than Stevie Wonder and his bodyguard walked down the Redwood Lane. Stevie asked her if she knew Amazing Grace in C. She sang and he played the harmonica. This was the most goosebump version I have ever heard. I had played some of Sarah's music for Stevie, and when he met her, he said, "You are fantastic because you sing like you really mean it." 2 months later, the spontaneous chain of events continued. Stevie called me to say he was performing in Nashville, and could I ask Sarah if she would join him? Not to miss this monumental concert, several of us flew to Nashville, met Sarah's parents, and proceeded to hear Sarah Beck perform on stage with Stevie Wonder. A local Nashville news service said the next day, "Where has this girl been hiding? If Stevie Wonder has discovered her, why hasn't a major label signed her yet?" 18 months after I spent 5 minutes with Sarah Beck in that tiny Nashville bar, she released her first record. She co-wrote and performs one of the songs with Keith John, Stevie's longtime backup singer. It all started because I happened to wander into the Bluebird and because Sarah took the initiative to give me the gift of a song with absolutely no expectations. The vision I had when I met her has to do more with what I felt with my heart and musical soul than it did with my relatively new eyesight. Now, with her new record, Music from Lovers and Fighters, the world can also meet Sarah Beck, smart, passionate, beautiful, and exceptionally talented. She says of our serendipitous meeting,
You should know that from my end, a huge part of the magic of this story is not only what it has meant to me personally and to my musical career, but what it means to the musical community here in Nashville. We are all so used to dealing with representatives of representatives in the music industry and talking about marketing instead of music. For me to meet Stevie and to have such a straightforward interaction has reminded everyone I know in Nashville that no matter what, it is always about the music, which is pretty close to the message of Crashing Through, that life is, in fact, about setting goals and believing that there is always a way to achieve them.
Sarah with Stevie at my mother's memorial.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Sarah and Park on stage with Stevie in a Nashville arena.
There were 2 people that I met who were friends. Actually, the amazing thing is, I met this friend of mine about a few years ago. He's blind as a bat.
As recently as October 2024, I attended a Stevie Wonder concert in Baltimore with Sarah Beck and her husband Park. 15 years ago, Stevie invited her to perform at his House Full of Toys benefit concert. Sarah and I also attended a Stevie Austin City Limits concert together in 2011. In addition to being a singer-songwriter and performer, Dr. Beck is a professor at Randolph College in Virginia. Sarah and Park have 2 beautiful, smart, talented girls, Just like their mom, I have had the pleasure of becoming close to her parents and extended family and looking forward to going on a cruise with them this summer. I shared an experience of a lifetime attending the 25th anniversary Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert with Sarah and my friend Rob Reese. I met half the people in my record collection backstage. I shook hands with Tom Hanks and didn't even know who it was at the time. The next day, we met up with another significant person I met through Crashing Through. I first sat down and got acquainted with Bruce at my son's soccer game in Davis around 2008. We had many more conversations before he turned Crashing Through into a screenplay. It is expected that the movie version of a book will not be the same as the book. Fox eventually rejected his work, which he refused to modify to their liking. Bruce is a very deep and genuine human being, so I was motivated to stay in touch with him. I closely followed his development of Ghost the Musical based on his Oscar-winning movie of the 90s. Gina and I were able to meet the lead, Casey Levy. Afterwards, she showed us parts of the set. Her song, Here Right Now, became a theme song for Gina and me. I also saw her when she was the lead of Frozen on Broadway. In an email on October 4th, 2011, I wrote the following to Bruce Rubin. My friend Gina and I saw Ghost tonight from the second row center. I loved being able to hear the orchestra directly and to see the gloves of the conductor waving about. I have never seen that before. I was close enough to see the movements of the actors. Gina has a bit more vision. Gina had seen the movie, but I hadn't. I did read the script, but I got a bit lost in the details. The performance was delayed because a maintenance worker cut through a power line and almost got killed. This was easily the best musical I have ever seen. I loved the fact that the music was fantastic, but there was plenty of dialogue. I got confused in a couple places, but things became clearer as we went along. Molly's voice is extraordinary. Otome was a kick. I don't know what I expected from the story, but it was extremely romantic, especially while holding hands with my new friend. This was really our first date, all the way to London from California. I cried 3 times in the first half, laughed, tapped my feet, and cried again in the second half. I was riveted the entire time. A lot to say for me in a play for almost 3 hours. I didn't realize how much I was becoming part of the story. You all pulled us in, one scene, one song at a time. I kept feeling a range of emotions as I connected with the characters. When Molly and Sam last talked, he said, "I love you," and she said ditto. Tears began streaming down my face, so simple, so beautiful, and hitting so close to home. The little things in a relationship become very important. It all tied back to those 3 words or 1 word, depending upon who said them. Tonight, Sam and Molly spoke to me. I realized in a very personal way that someday I too could feel and say, "I love you." Endless possibilities came back to life. It wasn't a sad ending, it was the beginning of hope. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. Thank you for the tears that keep flowing. Silently, Gina and I found our way out of the theater and into an Italian place next door. I couldn't talk for half an hour. Out of fear, I'd start bawling again. This all came from left field. I am sorry you weren't here in person to share Ghost with me, but you were there in every way that counts. Your art has blessed us all, and me especially.
Let's welcome Bruce Rubin.
The best thing about Ghost is it got me a film career, so I got a chance to meet Mike, and then I got a chance to meet Gina, and it's really one of the great love stories, and I have to say, as much as Ghost touches me, the fact is, Ghost also touched a lot of people, and the most fascinating part of it is that it brought Mike and Gina together on their first date. And they went to see it in London, and then they went to see it again on Broadway. And I think the first date was probably significant. I think the second date kind of cemented things. And now we're here celebrating an actual extraordinary wedding and the story of love. The love inside, you take it with you. This is love that they have forever. You can feel it. The thing that's so amazing to me is that I actually was part of a musical. I can't sing, I can't dance, I don't have a bone in my body. But I did write 20 songs for this musical, 3 of which survive. We had some very good songwriters working on the show. Dave Stewart and Glenn Ballard are remarkable writers. But I contributed to this first song, including its title and its concept, and it's called Here Right Now, and it's everything I stand for in life. And I think it's everything that Gina and Mike believe in. It's all about here right now, and this is the song we're going to introduce to you. It's the first song from the show, and I'm very happy and proud to have it be the second song at this wedding.
Here right now, here right now. This is what we're living for. This is when we give into the moment and let go. Here right now, everything we're dreaming of is coming through if we step up and own it. Let it flow. Here right now, here right now. Here is where we make it everything we'll ever need. Here right now, here right now. And for once it feels like it was always meant to be. One foot in front of the other, so much for us to discover still. This is why we'll get it, everything we have and more. As long as we stay together, we'll just keep getting better till it really does matter what comes after.
Those are the voices and stories of my new vision and crashing through journey. I would never have met these people and their families without the new vision experience and the Crashing Through book. Dan Goodman, Ione Fine, Annabelle Hobley, Robert Kurson, Sarah Beck, and Bruce Rubin. Who would have guessed we would remain close friends decades later? You can link to the media pieces in the show notes. Check out the Crashing Through book in print or audio, including from the National Library Services for the Blind. Thank you for listening. Please rate and share. Expect the next episode of The People Make the Places the first Sunday in June. Here is the musical version of Crashing Through, written and performed by Sarah Beck.
Baby, where'd you get those crying eyes? All this tightrope walking, tightrope walking. Baby, anytime you realize there are worse things than falling, worse things than falling. You can always take a safer route, but that ain't what life's about. It's the one and the try.